Squad Senior here, back with another update on this Super M project. As you can see, I've got the plug wires installed, spark plugs installed, distributor mounted, coil mounted, and everything is ready to go on the ignition. So I got a few questions I'm going to address from the comment section here first before I get into how I time this ignition system. So let's get into some of the comments. Okay, a lot of comments on this alternator. This is what was on there when I got it. I'm sticking with it right now. At this time, I do not have the 6-volt generator to put on. Something I will be looking at in the future. And it's very possible this will be switched over to 6-volt again, because I do have all the starter stuff to do it already. A good working 6-volt starter with the pull rod and everything like that. So anyway, guys are questioning on the basic resistor setup. Basically, I've never seen one set up like this. It has worked. I'm just going to stick with it. And as you can see, I do have the 3 amp rectifier diodes. This is something I had around for a long time for these conversions. And I don't know if you noticed, this came from Radio Shack. I'm not even sure if the outfit's in business anymore, because we do not have one available right now for sure, and I've never did an internet search for one. So another option they have is you can get a plug-in unit that goes in here. Comes with this same plug-in unit. You plug that in, plug this into it, run it off your positive side of your battery side of your alternator, and you just run this back to your switch to activate the power to it. So I do have an extra wire running the alternator. It's blanked off right now that I could hook in real quick into the harness without tearing this harness apart. So anyway, that's kind of the future plans, possibly switching this back to 6-volt and everything like that. So if that happens, it's going to be probably a new wiring harness will have to be made, but I will utilize this one if somebody wants to do a switch over. I'll have a harness made for them and they should be set to go. So that should hopefully cover the alternator setup. I know a few of your guys' eyes have been twitching over this, and I know Squatch's eyes have been too, but right now it hasn't bothered me, so we're going to go with it. Another comment I've had is on this solenoid. I'm not sure if I totally understood the commenter or not, but anyway, I got the 2 wires here. This solenoid is set up very similar to a Ford solenoid setup from years ago. I can disconnect this wire right here. This solenoid is internally grounded to the case, so from the starter button, all I got to do is hook up to this wire right here and push the button. It'll activate the solenoid. Now with this system, it's very similar to the Ford. When you activate the solenoid, makes contacts for the high amperage side. It also makes contact and activates this wire for 12-volt that does go back to the coil for giving you a little better power to the distributor. So anyway, that's one of the problems. Now they do have this type of solenoid where you have to ground this terminal. You hook your hot positive here, you ground this terminal, and this one has to be grounded to activate the solenoid. This one is internally grounded, so all you got to do is hook this wire up for the start function of this solenoid. So that's what I've got set up on this one. It's been working good. We'll stick with it. And like I say, if I do convert this to 6-volt, this whole starter system will be changed. I'll have the pull rod going up. I've got all the parts for that. So all that's lacking is that generator right now. Another comment I had is, why is the amp gauge upside down in here? Well, a lot of guys, you'll notice the fulcrum point for your amp gauge is usually here and your reading is up here. As you can see, this one is set up different for that. So working good. If you have a generator, you can go to a lower reading amp gauge with the alternator. At least with this one, you need at least a 60 amp reading amp gauge. So that's why I picked up this at the parts store. It just reads this way. It's all it needs for this to function right now. So if this does get converted to 6 volts, might be looking at an IH amp gauge to replace this, which is very simple to do. So that would be another part of the conversion back to 6 volt. Well, here we are back at the ignition system again. When I installed the distributor on here, when I rebuilt the engine, my crankshaft, camshaft were in time. My pointer lined up where it needed to be on the crankshaft pulley. I did paint the mark on that so it's easy to see. So I knew my internals on my engine were in time with the compression stroke of the engine. Now you guys got to remember that the camshaft turns half speed of the crankshaft. So if you turn this one turn back to the pointer again, you're going to be 180 degrees off on timing on your distributor. So I just left everything after the overhaul in time. I knew I was on my compression strokes when I installed this. Everything internally was in the position it needed to be. Now when I usually set up the distributor, I use the outer terminal on the distributor cap as number 1. When you slide the distributor in, you make sure your rotor is lined up with the number 1 terminal on your cap. You slide it in and you're really close to being in time. Now to fine tune the time, after that you just turn the distributor to get it in the right location, and that's what you generally need a timing light for. But there is another way you can do this to verify you're going to be really close, and we'll get into that next. Okay, now if you've ever had your distributor off for a rebuild, rebush it, reseal it, just to clean up all the advanced whatever, and you want to make sure your engine's back in compression stroke, what I do is you pull number 1 plug, and you can see hopefully that I do have it plugged. A lot of guys will just stuff a rag in there, and what you do then is you just bump the starter till that blows out. That'll tell you for sure that you're coming up on your compression stroke. So let's bump that starter and see if we can get that plug to pop out of there. She flies when she comes out to hit the wall over here. I think I can find it again. So anyway, that's why you want to just bump the starter until that plug comes out. The next thing you have to do is finish turning your engine around until your timing marks line up on your pointer and your crankshaft pulley. Okay, here we are over at the crankshaft pulley and the pointer, and you can see I got the white dot on the notch on the pulley, and it's lined up with the pointer. So we'll get into the next step here, how I verify that my distributor's on number 1. Okay, here we are back at the distributor. Again, if you've had this out, you go through that sequence first, then when you install the distributor, you just make sure the rotor is pointing to number 1. And as you can see, we are really close right there. So next step, put the cap on, and I'll show you how I get it in time. Okay, now that I know I'm on compression stroke, got my pointer lined up with the mark on the crankshaft pulley. To fine tune the timing, this is my sequence of going about it, is what I will do is, you can see, turn the distributor, you can do that. Number 1 spark plug is hooked up, ignition switch on. Then what I do is I just turn this back and forth until I get the spark on the plug. I don't know if you guys can see the spark in there or not, but she is sparking there. So what I'll do, I'll just turn this distributor back till I just get the spark right there, and you're timed right at top dead center without the engine running. That's plenty good to start it. Probably put the timing light on to verify. That's what I do. But I know we're good enough to get this unit started. So that's my sequence about timing this 2 different ways. You know, one after an overhaul of the whole engine, one after an overhaul of just a distributor. So pretty basic, pretty easy. It works really good, and I know she will start right there. So that's my sequence of doing it. Hopefully this helps some of you out there.
Okay, everybody, Squatch back again. Now the senior's got his details out of the way, I have just a couple I want to talk about real quick, and then we will lay out the path moving forward, working toward a first start. So, a couple things I had to do to this. I mentioned in my last 1113 video, the senior had a minor coolant leak on the engine. It ended up coming from out from underneath this stamped cover that goes along the water jacket. Now, it's really easy to get leaks from these because this stamped tin that makes up the cover can get wavy and can get pushed in around the bolt holes. And Senior had been through all that. He'd flattened the surfaces when he was putting it together, and he even put sealer on the bolts when he put it in. Pop a link up right here. You can go back to that episode in the series and actually re-watch that part again if you so choose. But after about 2 days of coolant being in this thing, I noticed some minor seeps coming out from underneath the cover all around, on top and on bottom. So at first I tried just snugging the bolts a little bit. That was a paper gasket in there. It was not cork. Usually with cork, snugging the bolts slightly can remedy slight leaks like that. Unfortunately, that did nothing for it. I didn't figure it would. So I bit the bullet, drained it down, and removed the cover. I also had to remove this governor rod. I had to remove the air intake tube and also the choke rod off the carburetor to give myself enough room to sneak that out. And the funny thing was, when I took the last bolt out, the cover literally fell away from the block. I didn't have to pull it. I didn't have to pry it. It fell off. And I thought, well, that's weird. That thing really didn't seal. Upon further examination, where he had siliconed the gasket to the block was sticking to the block. Where he had siliconed it to the cover was also sticking to the cover, and the gasket had separated right down the middle, and that cover just fell off. And it looks like it was an incorrect, improper, or bad gasket material, because the material between the bolts was damp. It was like the material had separated from itself and became porous, and the coolant was actually leaching up through the gasket material, and it was still sealed very well to the block and to the cover. I had to put in a lot of scraping to get all that old sealer and gasket off, but I remade the gasket with some of my known good material. I put a little bit of sealer on to help it out again, reinstalled the cover, we refilled it, and that's been good ever since. So I'm chalking that up to just a bad gasket. After I was satisfied that that repair had proven itself, I got a new fuel line made. We have the spiral to absorb vibration, and also went through the sediment bowl, resealed the shutoff packing, new screen, new gasket under the glass. Glass is all cleaned out, so fuel system should be intact and ready to go. Final item I need to address is the steering. You will notice we still don't have a steering wheel or steering shafts that go down the top of this tractor. Reason being, after we run this, Senior wants to have easy access to remove this valve cover and do a retorque on the cylinder head nuts, as well as recheck gap on all of the valves. So we don't want to have that stub shaft coming from the bolster through the radiator and obstructing our way to get into any of that. So when we do the first start, we're not going to drive it because we're not going to be able to steer it. It's just to run it, test it out a little bit, get some heat in it, and then pop it back down as needed to do those final adjustments. But on the topic of the steering, we were trying to get the Charlin power steering pump mounted up the other day. This is aftermarket Charlin setup, vintage aftermarket I should say. And these slots right here would attach to the governor cover there, and then the pump resides in this area where I had to clean up that cutout in the fan that allows clearance for the pump pulley. The cause of our problems, and I'll try and make this brief here, was this new reproduction fan that Senior bought for the project. The original was worn and a little bit damaged. We didn't trust it, and you could still get these new reproduction. Senior purchased it. Now, the fan blades on this repro are wider than the fan blades that were on the original. That means they're going to come in contact the face of that power steering pump pulley. So we reinstalled the spacer ring behind the fan that we left out initially. That moved the fan forward, and we even put washers between the pump and the bracket to try and pull the pump back more. And the best we could achieve was maybe not quite 1/8 of an inch clearance from the front of that pulley to the back of those fan blades, and that's not enough to have any level of comfort in at all. If there was any oscillation in those blades, you're going to have contact, and you don't want to have fan blades start to fly. That's catastrophic. So I guess in a nutshell, we decided that Charlin power steering setup was going to be more trouble than it was worth, and being that we're not going to have a loader on this anymore, we both agreed that we probably don't need power steering anyway. Even with a wide front, that should make it a little easier to steer still. So we're going to go and just eliminate all of the Charlin aftermarket pieces off of this unit. You can see we have the pump, the gear motor, fan, reservoir, bracket and clamp for the reservoir, a couple new hoses there. I'm going to take this additional drive pulley off the front that was a part of that kit, and we're going to need to take this gauge pod panel off, because that is also custom made for that Charlene gear motor. That's what these 3 holes are for, is for bolting the gear motor directly to this piece. That also means that I had to source yet some more parts from the salvage yard, because to fit the gear motor in line with this worm shaft, they had to cut the worm shaft off shorter, and that's where the gear motor would attach to that. So this shaft will now stay with the rest of those Charlene power steering unit parts. So quick trip down to the local salvage yard yesterday. I found a pretty nice looking, still intact Farmall M upper steering shaft. It has good wear surfaces, it has a good keyway, the worm is good on the other end, and I sourced the appropriate factory original dash panel for it, as well as the cast iron bearing that the shaft would go through that bolts directly to the back side of that panel. So after we run this, well, guess what? We got some more pieces to paint. I'm going to have to clean up this shaft and clean up this panel and this bushing, reassemble all that, and at that point we can install it here and we can put it all back to original. We'll be back to non-power steering. I think that's going to be probably the easiest way forward, and then we'll reinstall the top shaft with the steering wheel. And aside from sheet metal, that's pretty much all that's left to do on this thing. You can see Senior's got all 4 of the plugs out. Plan moving ahead, we are going to wheel this over with the plugs out under no compression until we build oil pressure. Once we have some oil pressure in the system, we're going to put the plugs back in, hook the wires back up, and we're going to attempt a first start. So I'm really not trying to drag this out for you guys, but that's going to end the video right here, because this is kind of the last leg of all the work, all the preparations that go into trying to get a machine set up, not only to run, but for all the components to fit and to operate and to work as they should. And like I said, you start intermingling factory original, vintage aftermarket, new repop, all these little problems pop up. So that's pretty much the story. We're getting down to her, boys. Next video is going to be a start attempt. Thanks for watching. Welcome back, everybody. The day has finally arrived. We're going to try a test fire on the Super M for the first time after rebuild. And you thinking of rolling this outside first?
Yeah, I'm rolling outside to start it first.
All right.